This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hi everybody, my name's John Bleasdale. I'm a writer and film critic, and today I'm going to be talking to Peter Bradshaw, who is a film critic for The Guardian, as most of you will already know, and is also the author of a new book, The Films That Made Me, which is a collection of his criticism over the years, and it also has a great introduction and some great introductions to the sections as well, which sort of put into context how cinema has affected him over the years. The conversation's great, and we talk about a heck of a lot of stuff, so I'm just going to let that speak for itself. Remember, if you like the episode, please share on the social media. You can follow me on Twitter at drjonty, DRJONTY. But before you do any of that, just enjoy the conversation.
The way I got into journalism and or film journalism is basically a very happy accident, happy for me anyway. I did an Eng-Lit degree. I did a straight up English literature degree of the sort that people don't do anymore.
Right.
People don't want to do English literature anymore. It's like telling students, do you want to study basket weaving or something like that? It's considered to be, when I was in my teens and 20s, this is years and years ago, of course, studying English literature was a completely straight up, it was a plank of the sort of university school system and a plank of the A-level system. But now, of course, it's actually you're more likely to study film in a way than English literature. I say that's my entirely impressionistic view. I have no facts for this whatsoever, but I feel that, anyway. Where were we? I was studying English literature. I really enjoyed it. I wanted to study film a bit more at the time. This was Cambridge in the 1980s, and there was no provision for studying film at Cambridge then as now. Nowadays at Cambridge, you can do an MA in film theory. I think a very rarefied film, sort of theoretically inflected MA course, interestingly run by the Modern Languages Department, because I think Cambridge still regards it as a sort of very suspicious continental thing to want to do. But there were a few courses run by a lecturer called Stephen Heath, who was at that stage was the centre of a huge row about critical theory and structuralism and deconstruction, along with Colin McCabe, who of course went on after that to be a great panjundrum at the British Film Institute. Anyway, I did English literature, and then I moved even further away from film. I did a PhD on Renaissance English literature, which rendered me, as people commented at the time, more unemployable than ever.
Yes.
It was crazy, and looking back on it, and sometimes in a spirit of masochism, I try to reread my thesis in those days, which is a masterpiece of what Kingsley Amis called pseudo light being cast on non-problems.
It reminds me of that Groundhog Day scene where Andy McDowell says that she studied French poetry, and Bill Murray goes, "Why?" And just sort of laughs in her face, and then obviously a few days later, when he's worked it out, he quotes some Baudelaire to her. Yeah. That's basically, I did the Bill Murray laugh in my face kind of every day in the mirror, and it got less and less funny. Anyway, I did it. I completed my PhD within like 3.5 years, which at those days was considered very good going. People would spend decades on their PhDs in those days before the universities became much stricter and more commercialized. Anyway, I did that, and then I kind of was utterly at a loss to know what to do. Utterly at a loss. I applied for jobs kind of everywhere, straight up jobs, almost like jobs shelf stacking at Tesco. I was so depressed, and I took a job basically in journalism, because I thought, well,
journalism is a place for a square peg for a square hole for a square peg like me, or at any rate a round hole for a square peg, but a round hole that I could sort of jam myself into. And so I took jobs, sort of freelance journalism jobs, and I got a job with of all things, really, the Evening Standard, which, looking back on that job with the Evening Standard, I have mixed feelings about it. It was a rum old newspaper in a way, but weirdly, it did have space for me, waifs and strays, people like me, and I was allowed to write almost about anything I wanted. I was in a way more of a political journalist in those days. I was that kind of slightly kind of bland, liberal, pro-European journalist at a time when that was, I don't know, just about as fashionable or unfashionable as it is now. I did that for a long time at the Evening Standard. Throughout the 1990s, I got a staff job and I was doing pretty well. And then a very bizarre accidental thing happened, which was that I was sued by the late Tory MP, Alan Clark. This is
of the Alan Clark Diaries fame.
Alan Clark Diaries, yes, exactly. It was a really weird thing. I was in a spirit of raillery, as we say, in a spirit of, not terribly scornful satire. I was doing a pastiche of his diaries in the Evening Standard, and he got very, very cross and sued. And the Evening Standard editor of those days, Max Hastings, the formidable military historian Max Hastings, thought it would be hilarious if we defended this case instead of just settling, which is what newspapers obviously would do with anything else. And the case went to court, and I achieved a kind of 10 and the sort of 7 microseconds of mini fame as the author of this spoof. And it amused a couple of people at the Guardian, basically. Right. The people that it amused were Ian Katz, who in those days was a very senior author, a senior editor at the Guardian. Now he's in charge of Channel 4 in the UK, and Alan Rusbridger, who at that stage was the editor. And they were looking for a completely left field new choice to be the film critic after the retirement of the legendary Derek Malcolm. And they just completely reached out to me, and this was a complete leap in the dark on their part, and they completely took a massive gamble, because I'd written I'd written a bit about movies, but frankly I hadn't written a huge amount. I'd written this, that and the other. I'd done a few interviews with actors. I really didn't have that much of a profile writing about, or any sort of a profile writing about cinema, but they reached out to me. Alan, I mean, I'll never forget it. Alan Rusbridger literally cold called me at the office in the Standard, and he just said, "Would you like to be the film critic?" And I think he was expecting me to play it very cool and to say, well, I'll have to think about it, blah, blah, blah. But I almost shouted the word yes before he'd finished the word, before he finished the sentence. And that was it. It was just, I bit his hand off for this amazing opportunity. And never a day goes by without me blessing that day and blessing that extraordinary stroke of luck that he was going to give me what amounted to, was one of the best jobs, perhaps the best job in British Fleet Street. I mean, it was mind-blowing to me that I got this opportunity. And so I just threw myself straight into it. And that was, golly, that was I keep thinking this is 20 years ago. And I just thought, this is amazing. I've got the opportunity to write professionally about something that I love, and to cultivate my appreciation of cinema, to cultivate my own profile as a writer. And I think also to keep learning, because I'd never got out of thinking myself, I think you appreciate this, John, as a student, a PhD student. As a formative time in my life, I loves me a reading list. The idea of a bibliography, a reading list, I think, wow, that's great. And I've never lost my love for that. And I've never lost the idea that a film critic is a student, in a way. A film critic is a student. And it's not merely the weirdly school-like professional experience of kind of filing into a screening theatre in the way that you used to file into a classroom, basically. It is weirdly, it is, as professional experiences go, it is the one that's weirdly most like school. But albeit school without any of the grief and all of the joy, basically. And I think that's quite an important thing. Sometimes critics either implicitly or explicitly affect an air of utter omniscience about what they're talking about. To a certain extent, you have to do that. You have to write from a position of strength. But also, I think you have to realize that you are learning all the time. Every day that goes past, you're learning. And I think that is an important part of it, I think, in a way. And I think readers will respond to that, respond to some measure of, if not humility exactly, then realism.
I mean, also, you're sort of like on the front line of film criticisms. You're getting the movies arriving, and you're getting a bite of the apple before anybody else has. And it's there has to be a degree of humility to that, because you don't have the benefit of watching it 6 months down the line and it's already established its position in the world. No,
you don't know what that, and to be totally cynical about it, you don't know what you're supposed to think. You see, this is it. You have to go out on a limb, and if it turns out that your view, completely honestly held, sincerely held, turns out to be a real minority opinion, you kind of have to stick to your guns. And film critics are one of the very few critics who are forced to take responsibility. They are forced to have the courage of their convictions. Very few journalists have to do this. Most journalists or writers in any sphere whatsoever, they can very quietly and very cunningly get the lie of the land. We can't. We can't.
Yeah.
We are given a film and we have to write about it sort of straight away. Now, there are some critics who perhaps they're going to fess up to it and perhaps they won't. They can sort of leave it a little bit and sort of say, oh yeah, hang on, this seems to be, there's something there that I didn't see at first, some terrible insult, some terrible aspect of something that's problematic, and I don't think I would have seen that at first, but I will write as if of course I've seen it. Now, film critics usually can't do it. Some film critics, but film critics who are, especially if you're seeing it for the very first time at a festival, say, you are, I mean, this is what makes the job so exciting, especially at somewhere like Cannes, where you're going to be shown some film and you literally have no idea what it's about. And it brings it home to you how you basically, when you see a film, you usually have some idea what it's about, and you have some idea what the critical or evaluative consensus is. But very often, especially at a festival, you don't, and you have to kind of gird your loins, and you have to have the courage of your convictions, and it's very bracing in a way.
When you first got that phone call from Alan, did you sort of run home and sort of start writing out a list of movies that you have to catch up on in order to?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I kind of did. I was sort of. I mean, I still do. I mean, I still panic that I haven't seen, and you realise part of getting older is that you realise that you're never going to see it all. I mean, it's just, again, that's the other weird thing about film criticism. Is if let's say you've been doing the job for 5 years, cinema has been in existence for like 100. So you have covered 5% of the entire history of the medium. It's like being a literary critic for about 400 years. It's just, or whatever it is. It's an amazing, vast array of stuff. And again, a film critic is unusual in that they are expected to kind of know, or basically know, about everything in a way that no other journalist is, no other writer or critic is. I mean, no other. I mean, a literary critic is not expected to sort of know everything about Estonian literature, but you are kind of expected to sort of have it in your wheelhouse in a way as a film critic. But as I say, I like the rest of us, I kind of laugh at all this, but it is stimulating and amazing and thrilling that is the opportunity, the amazing opportunity that you're being given. But yeah, I mean, when I kind of gibbered with a mixture of jubilation and panic that I was going to have to be I was going to have to, be on top of all this. And fortunately for me, it was sort of happening a little bit before the era of social media, when some of my kind of missteps would not be brutally hammered in the way that they would be now. I mean, they were pretty brutally hammered. At the time, there was the Guardian, which was at the forefront of interaction, what used to be known in those days as Web 2.0, of basically the public being allowed to talk back to the journalists.
What could possibly go wrong?
Possibly go wrong. There was something called the talk boards. The Guardian in those days had a page called Guardian Unlimited, the talk boards, and I was regularly absolutely hammered on that. Absolutely hammered. More hammered more badly than on regular below the line comments. Although of course you get pretty hammered there as well. And I think in the years that have gone by since then, I think there's a kind of truce has sort of settled in a way between critics and commentators. We've kind of got used to each other, and it's less acrimonious in a way. The acrimony has, of course, long ago migrated to Twitter. Actual worrying about below the line comments is very passé now. Then the artillery, the warfare, the trench warfare has. Of course, it's very bad taste to talk about these metaphors and just about now, but that has migrated to Twitter.
You've called your book "The Movies That Made Me," and the films that made me. Sorry, yes, yeah. An essential difference.
Unforgettable title.
Yeah.
There's actually, it's an old gag. There is, I think there are two programs, one on radio and one on Netflix, I think, called The Movies That Made Me. But yeah, to my chagrin, I realized that joke, or that play on words, the films that made me laugh, the movies that made me scared, blah, 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 the movies that made me, that sadly is not, I didn't invent that joke.
So what are the formative films, even before you became a critic, that sort of informed your love of cinema and gave you that sort of made the idea of being the Guardian film critic the dream job?
Well, there are a number of answers I can give to this, but they're all very hackneyed, and you've heard about 1,000 times before, but I'll tell you anyway. One was seeing Scorsese's Raging Bull at the old Screen on the Hill on Haverstock Hill in Belsize Park in North London. I was about 18 or 19 years old. I'd been inspired to see it by an amazing review by a critic who isn't talked about as much as she should be, as Judith Williamson, who was writing in those days for the old City Limits magazine, who wrote a passionate and brilliant piece, short piece, but passionate and absolutely compelling review of Raging Bull from a feminist point of view, her view of Jake LaMotta holding on to the male attitudes which were dragging him down, like a drowning man holding on to a life belt that's made of lead, basically, as it drags him down. I was inspired to see the movie because of that, and I'll never forget how my mind was totally blown, and I'll never forget the way I felt when I kind of staggered back out into the streets afterward, a mixture of being utterly exhausted, physically drained, as if I just played 10 sets of tennis, but also an amazing sense of strength, as if I'd just taken kind of cocaine or something. I felt as if I could pick up a bus and throw it across Hampstead Heath. I felt like I sort of the Incredible Hulk. I could do anything. I could wrench a bus stop out of its concrete settings. I felt I could do anything. At the same time, I felt as if I needed to check into hospital and be hospitalized for 2 months. It was amazing to me, absolutely amazing. And I couldn't, if you'd asked me why exactly, why? It's just the profoundly mysterious, almost pageant of events in Jake LaMotta's life, from his youth to his age. And it was the fact that he did not seem to have learned anything. He did not seem to have grown or become that interested, that more morally profound a figure, in a way that we are still encouraged to think has to be the narrative arc of all Hollywood movies. He hadn't really overcome any obstacles. He hadn't surmounted anything. He hadn't really learned anything. All he did at the very end of his life was did do this cheesy sub-Brando nightclub act where he did an impression of Brando on the waterfront, along with everybody else, including I love this, the things he does are Paddy Chayefsky and Shakespeare, and I'd love to hear it's a shame. I wonder if Scorsese's got any outtakes of De Niro as Jake LaMotta doing Shakespeare. It would be amazing. It was just the fact that he carried on, and then there was the biblical quote at the end about redemption. And I found that amazingly moving, and yet he didn't seem to be particularly redeemed. And the stunning reunion scene with his brother Joey, played by Joe Pesci, is a masterpiece of nothing happening at all. They don't hug. Joey just looks bored and irritated to see his brother again after all these years. It means absolutely nothing at all to him. And yet, despite the lack of these emotional pointers, despite the lack of affect, just simply I think it's something in the editing of it, something in the way Thelma Shoemaker achieved in this parade, this, as I say, I think almost like a pageant of scenes in the life, the kind of epic theatre aspect of Raging Bull just overwhelmed me. And it overwhelms me now, thinking about it now, talking about it now.
And you get extra points for using Marvel comic metaphors in your reaction to.
Oh yeah. Oh, I loved Marvel at the time. The interesting thing about relationship with Marvel, when I was 11 years old, I collected I was out there buying the first UK edition of Spider-Man Comics Weekly, which, after all, I threw away, which was a stupid thing for me to do because I don't have a pension. If I kept them, I could have, I don't have to worry about being poor. But I didn't. I was never a Marvel fanatic, but I loved. But I was one of the people that loved Spider-Man in the initial UK with Thor, Spider-Man and Thor. I loved it, and I saw that it was cinematic, and of course, as everybody says now, it's taken this long for the movies to develop their CGI, basically, so you don't have to have wrinkly kind of spandex. It doesn't have to wrinkle. Now you can do it digitally. It's taken this long for the films, in a way, to catch up with Marvel. I'm not one of those people that complains about superhero films at all. I love superhero films. I think they're the westerns of our age. They're as formulaic as this. And you can get bored of that. You can get bored with any other kind of genre. But
there were plenty of bad westerns.
Yeah, oh, sure. I mean, there were loads of. I mean, westerns. There were. I suppose what we now call landfill westerns. There were just a colossal amount of westerns, and and of course on TV. Again, when I was growing up, westerns were a staple of TV show, Western movies and Western TV shows.
Yeah, I remember, Bonanza and High Chaparral and all of those.
Yeah, all those things. Yes, exactly. What they meant to us kids growing up in the British home counties, God only knows. But we accepted it as a lingua franca of storytelling. Western.
Yeah, I mean, Champion the Wonder Horse. I remember watching that relentlessly. It was always on in the morning.
Yeah, we used to love it, and it was like it was like watching Star Trek. Of course, we had no idea of what these things, what it was like being on as a crew member on the USS Enterprise. It's like being, at the bunkhouse in the High Chaparral. It was completely alien to us, but we accepted it. We took what we were given in those days.
I remember. I mean, I live on the northwest. I grew up on the northwest coast of Cumbria. And I used to look out on the house is right by the sea, so we had this view of the sea, and the sun would go down, and the had wonderful sunsets, and the Isle of Man would stand out against the setting sun, and it was absolutely gorgeous. And I remember when I saw Star Wars and I saw Luke looking at those two suns. Yeah, I just thought that's me. I'm in the middle of nowhere. I'm watching this in barren furnace, for crying out loud, which is, if there's a center to the universe, I'm as far away as possible from it. So I remember relating to that elsewhere that cinema was giving me very much.
Yeah, I mean, I remember this kind of connects with one of my other great cinematic moments. Obviously, I mean, when I was 15, I went to the United States for the first time. Which is still one of the most, again, another mind-blowing experience in my life. This connected me with popular culture and with the wellspring of what I realized was the source of the popular culture I've been kind of consuming uncritically for the last 15 years of my life, basically. One of the most amazing experiences, and it's still incredible, it's still gastronomically, it's still the most incredible experience of my life. It's going to a proper burger joint for the first time, because before that in the UK, there was something called the Wimpy Bar, where you were served a sort of burger made of creosote on a plate that you had to eat with a knife and fork. It was terrible. But it was in Massachusetts. We went to a Burger King, and I was getting a proper cheeseburger with pickles and ice cold Coca-Cola. Again, eccentric, because in those days, the UK did not consider it normal to refrigerate drinks. And I just bit into it, and I thought, that is, I was just been taken up to a new level of what you're supposed to feel like when you eat something, basically. I mean, I've been to loads of posh restaurants since then, but I don't think I've ever experienced since then the kind of quantum leap of enjoyment as I had then. The other thing, I don't know quite how I've got onto this track, but the other thing was, for the first time, I saw Star Wars, and I was extremely pleased with myself, because I was seeing Star Wars before any of my friends, because in the summer of '77, it hadn't come out in the UK yet.
Right, yeah.
I was seeing it with my American cousins, and I just thought it was mind-blowing. And my mind was sort of furthermore blown about Alec Guinness being in it, because the other great experience of my life was seeing, I guess the Ealing comedies generally, but for me, one of the most perfect films, formally perfect film I've ever seen, is Kind Hearts and Coronets, of course, starring Alec Guinness in all those roles. And it sort of did my head in that I knew that Alec Guinness was 30 years, 40 years younger in that film. But of course, he was playing an array of characters who were sort of the same age as Ben Kenobi. And I thought, my God, Ben Kenobi is like another character that he's playing from Kind Hearts and Coronets, another mysterious old character with fathomless wisdom and strategic depth. Amazingly, he's like another character that he's playing. Maybe there is another Alec Guinness, who in fact does not look young or old, but is a kind of creature from another planet impersonating all these characters. Amazing. And I still think that Kind Hearts and Coronets is a beautiful film. It's a perfect film. It's one of these movies in the British film industry where everything comes together, particularly the fusion of tragedy and seriousness and suspense thrillers with comedy. And sometimes I feel, even with the great Ealing comedies, that the comedy aspect of it is a little bit knockabout for me. Get it? It's almost something we've inherited in a way, all the way from Shakespeare, the idea of a comedy interlude in the middle of something very serious. That's something we've inherited over something from 400 years ago. And I think it fuses most perfectly in Robert Hamer's Kind Hearts and Coronets. It's a lovely film. But as I say, that's in a way one of my key cinematic experiences as a teenager, is seeing Star Wars and realizing that, is it really true that Ben Kenobi is in this film? Maybe he is the lost member of the Gascoigne family, the most extraordinary member of the Gascoigne family, was withheld from us for 30 years, and now he is here. Amazing.
1977. I saw it in England. It was I'm guessing that it was the first film I ever saw at the cinema, because I can't believe I would have been taken to see anything before that. I certainly don't have any memory of anything before that. But because there was only Star Wars, you know, there wasn't Star Wars 2 yet for a few years. It wasn't even on television. I found that anybody who was related to Star Wars, I would watch this. You know, I would like, oh, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, that's got, you know, Ben Kenobi in it, so I've got to watch that. And I've got to watch, you know, all those sort of quite terrible Harrison Ford films like Hanover Square and Force 10 from Navarone and all these. So by association, you would watch all around it.
Yeah, I mean, I still, every time I watch Apocalypse Now, I think, oh my God, Harrison Ford is in this. I forgot. I can watch it over and over again on a sort of Groundhog Day, thinking, fuck, isn't that Harrison Ford? Yes. Yes, you've now thought that to yourself about 8 times. That's Harrison Ford is in that. Is he in that? Oh, Christ, he is. Yeah, I mean, I love those, I love those interviews, those Parkinson interviews where Alec Guinness talks about the fact that he just talks about, I don't know, this silly little film. But He always talks about, I love it, it's one of the very few actors who talks about how much money he made out of it. He had to kind of bully George Lucas into giving him whatever it was, 1% of the gross, or 2%, or 5%, whatever it is, whatever it was.
I think the story was he gave him a percentage, and then
He forgot about it, didn't he? Or sort of played it down.
No, apparently he sent him a message saying, "Oh, it's really done a lot better than I thought it would. You know, it looks quite good." And he sort of said, "I'll give you another percentage point," and that for Guinness that meant like he was financially secure for the rest of his life. You know?
I think he earned about £250,000 a year until that moment, to the end of his life. Just he could have retired just on the Star Wars money, but he actually worked quite hard. But yes, again, it's in a way it took a sort of Englishman who was simultaneously very worldly about this sort of thing, but also very naive in the way that he was at the very last. No Hollywood actor would talk in those terms. Certainly not even not a Brit. You'd have to. The nearest thing you've ever come to is someone like Rupert Everett or Hugh Grant, people who are people who have a kind of streak of not caring, and that's the way what Alec Guinness sort of had, in the way that he thought in his heart, he thought this Hollywood nonsense, not really what he was, but he was, he did it with, good grace, and he thought it was very amusing, but it wouldn't have surprised him to hear that Star Wars had done very badly and just vanished, but it wouldn't have surprised him or interested him in the slightest. I mean, in a way, I'm reminded of, I think, Maggie Smith, who she periodically asks what she thinks of Downton Abbey, and she just says, "I don't know, I've never seen it." You literally just say like that. Yes, I've never seen it. I've got a box set somewhere. I must get around to it.
I saw Ralph Fiennes. I'm not sure if they're showing this in England, but I saw it in Italy that they were showing a trailer for The Kingsman, and it had almost like making of footage at the trailer where they're going, "Oh yes, Matthew Vaughan's vision is unique and it's a very exciting story." But I keep remembering being interviewed for the Harry Potter films and talking about Voldemort and saying, "I haven't got a clue what this is. I just wave my hand around occasionally to say the line."
There are very few actors, in a way, who are sort of detached enough. In a way, it has to be the Brits, because they know they're being hired anyway for sort of what they are. But there's a younger generation, I think, in a way, of people almost sort of traumatized by the fact that they can't say out loud what they think, especially people who've been in superhero films. And people like, I suspect, Andrew Garfield, I think only now is coming to terms with the fact that, oh my God, he had to do this. It was like working for a factory. We don't particularly feel sorry for Andrew Garfield, who made a fortune from being Spider-Man, but there are sort of road of actors who you forget, in a way, you can't say out loud what you think, particularly when you're working for a corporate machine.
Well, there seems to be a narrative around the whole film, that it's not just playing the role, you're doing the publicity, you're doing the junkets, and you're sort of creating. I was struck by, well, just to stay on Garfield for a moment, during the run up to Tick Boom.
Yeah,
I keep calling it TikTok Boom, and that would be a stupid title, whereas Tick Tick Boom is a perfect title. It was all this stuff about honoring the real life person who the film is based on, Jonathan
Larson, yeah.
And there was just an element that was so. It felt like another part of his performance. I'm sure it was sincere and everything, but it just felt so sort of curated and you know.
I think so. I think you have to sell the public the entire package. They have to buy into the whole thing. And I think what's required of the actor, in a way, is that absolute commitment, in that they are selling you their own not merely the technique or the accomplishment of your impersonation of a particular character. I think interviews with stars have evolved away from that. There was a time when, 20, 30 years ago, an interview with an actor would spend more time talking about their lives and their technique and their thing, all the other things that they were doing. And now I suspect it's more about how utterly they identify with their character. They kind of have to provide a kind of what amounts to an outtake as their character in the EPK, the electronic. We, as journalists, we kind of go along with this. We behave as if we are interviewing somebody who is their representative on earth, in a way. Christ's representative on earth, like a priest. That's another sort of bizarre thing that happens in interviews. And sometimes it snaps. Sometimes what happens is that interviews go on all day, every day, and the actors have to maximize their time with interviewers, and they do interviews all day from 8 a.m. till whatever, 10 p.m. at night. They forget who it is they're talking to. They forget what it is they've said. And sometimes, in a way, just not out of diva-ish scorn or petulance, just in a way that they just can't keep up the strenuous job. They snap and say what's actually happening in their head. And what's happening when someone like Daniel Craig sort of says, oh Christ, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. That's what he means. He almost doesn't mean I don't like James Bond anymore. He means I don't want to do this 25 hours a day job of pretending to be. And someone like Liam Neeson, who in a way, kind of talking in his sleep, started telling how he went looking for black people to beat up. It was utterly bizarre, utterly bizarre. In a way, I think he was forgiven for that because he wasn't caught out in racism. He sort of said it. He kind of presented it, and people were so embarrassed for him in a way. I mean, they were shocked and appalled, and they sort of knew what he meant, what he was sort of trying to say, but it was so bizarre, and it was a function of this interview corporate publicity machine that film journalism is a part of these days.
I remember John Barnes sort of praising him for coming out with it and saying, because a guy in the 70s and 80s was racist. That's not, that's not shocking. Yeah.
No, I mean, Liam Neeson he meant to say isn't that bizarre? Isn't it crazy that I thought that? And yet he was saying that he actually did it. I'm not sure that I believe it, actually, to be honest. I'm not sure that he really did it, but it was very bizarre. It was, as I say, it was a function of the exhausting film journalism hype, PR, military industrial complex. And it wasn't a fact. It wasn't a piece of information that had been elicited by journalism in the normal sense. In a way, it was a kind of glitch in the matrix. It was a breakdown where they just couldn't keep doing it anymore, and just said some silly thing that had occurred to them.
Absolutely. I mean, do you think this world of sort of PR, do you think that there's a point a little bit like the superhero movies and the westerns in the past, that where the wave will collapse, that we'll have to think of another way of doing this?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, this is where, to return to my job for a moment, critics have to come in. They have to be the people who have to reassert some individual critical sort of body of intelligence that exists independently of all this. And that doesn't necessarily, and as I say, I return to this because I want to say this does not mean saying, aren't superhero movies awful? Aren't they utterly awful? Because that's just you're just going to end up saying the same thing all the time. But I think you have to reassert your own privilege, and it's kind of a hard-won privilege as a critic, as somebody who isn't anything to do with it, who doesn't have to deal with PR people in a way. It's a great privileged position to be in, because you don't have to do this. You just watch the movies and say what you think. And you have to bring to it your own critical intelligence and your own hinterland, your backstory, and you have to make it you have to make it the pretext for your own prose performance, which in a way is something else you have to bear in mind. But in a way, it's never been more important to do all that, because otherwise you kind of go along with everything.
With the book, you're putting together reviews that you've done in the past, and you're sort of an anthology in a sense. Looking back over that work, did you sort of recognize the same voice, or did you sort of see your voice develop as it went along?
That's a very good question. I'm not sure, to be honest with you. I mean, I sometimes look back on something I've written 20 years ago and think, wow, that's pretty good. I just think, A, I can't remember writing that, and B, God, that's actually pretty good. I don't look back and think, wow, oh, what a naive, unformed person that was. I mean, I think what happens is you achieve a kind of knowledge or wisdom, and you become less of a smart ass in a way at people's expense. One of the things that's I think happened recently, and I'm not sure whether this is a good or a bad thing. And I wonder what you think, John. It's become less easy for me, and I think less easy for everyone, to do an old-fashioned one-star funny takedown review. It's sort of less easy to do that now. It was kind of, it used to be a thing that you could do. It was a very important thing that critics could do. They couldn't, they shouldn't do it all the time, because that would undermine the value of that particular brand, but they could do it if they wanted to. And the one-star review, wow, people in the spirit of Schadenfreude, if they saw a one-star review, they would immediately go to that review and think, oh, this is, let's settle in for some, bloodshed. This is going to be amazing. Now I find it, maybe it's as a result of getting older, I don't do that as much. Not because I hope it's not because I've gone soft in any way. I hope it's not because that I've fallen to this line of, well, these filmmakers, they work bloody hard, and don't just slag them off. Because I think it doesn't matter how hard they worked, really. If they've worked hard or didn't work at all, if the end result is a good movie or a bad movie, that's...
I always think of it as a pilot. I always think if the pilot crashes the plane as soon as after takeoff, I don't care that I couldn't even get it off the ground. It's like,
exactly. That pilot has worked bloody hard,
Yeah, his takeoffs were perfect. But
it's bloody good. Just, and he's had a very hard time emotionally before he fucking crashed it. Yeah, exactly. It sort of doesn't matter what happens behind the scenes. It doesn't matter. And yet so much of film journalism is concerned with thinking that it does matter. Of course, they think that they have to bring that vast commitment, professional and writerly commitment, saying, wow, look what happened behind the scenes, look at all this, these people who have gone into the making of this film. And in a way, the critic is concerned only with the surface, only with the millimeter thick quality of the screen itself, what is actually on the screen, and affecting not to mind or care about what's happened behind it. But it is harder because you can blow up in your face more easily, really. And there is, if you attack a film, there's always a constituency that can be drawn together on social media to counterattack you. One example is a movie whose success kind of baffles me, and maybe there are people listening to this who think it's great, and if you do, then good luck to you. But I thought it was terribly bland. It's Disney's animation Encanto. Now, I sat through this, I thought it was as if it'd been written by committee. It seemed bizarrely strained. I didn't believe, I mean, it's absurd to talk about believing any of the characters in an animation called Encanto, but I didn't identify with them. I thought it was utterly without heart or real emotional life. I thought it had one or two good songs, and that was it. Now, I had to say that, and of course, I've been, ever from that day to this, of course, I've been attacked by Encanto fans, and you realize that, well, before this, that constituents of opinion would have been silent. It would have had no platform at all. Now it does, and that's a good thing, because there is this has happened in my professional lifetime. A democratization of opinion has revolutionized, in a way, the way in which we think about films, or certainly revolutionized the way we sort of write about them. But it's meant that you have to be a lot tougher, and you have to stick to your guns, and you have to realize that nobody gets the last word anymore. That in a way, social media and Twitter is full of people fanatically trying to have the last word. They're trying to appropriate to themselves that prerogative that used to only exist in print media, which is you, as the privileged person working for a newspaper or whatever, you get to have the last word. You get to say it, and nobody talks back to you. Now, a lot of the neurosis on social media is people wanting to win, wanting definitively and resoundingly to win the argument.
How dare you not love something that I love? How dare you love something that I hate?
Yeah. That's it goes on and on and on. And part of the sort of Jedi Zen that you have to cultivate, part of the sort of Ben Kenobi Zen you have to cultivate as a critic, is realizing, there it is, live and let live. You've had your say, I mean, that's why, I think, well, look, I still have this what the Americans used to call a bully pulpit. I have this privileged thing. I'm allowed to say it. Now, I can't just indulge in a shouting match with somebody from now until doomsday about who gets to win. I just can't do it.
I totally agree. I think this is where doing a PhD in literature comes into its own, because I had exactly that same experience. Mine was on the Romantics. So, and Shelley and Laughter. I told you when we were talking Tromsø.
I actually went away and read that sonnet after that. It was a sonnet, was it?
To Laughter. Yeah,
to Laughter, which I was fascinated by. I had no idea of the exact. Well, I'm not an expert by any means, but I'm intrigued by the fact that it's a very interesting point. Shelley thought that laughter was abusive or sneering or derisive laughter, and he hated the idea of laughter. Laughter wasn't joyous or celebratory; it was horrible.
It was always denigrating.
It was denigrating, and he thought it was something to be deprecated. And there is, I think it has something to say about our culture in a way, the idea of what laughter is.
But the thing that sort of connects to what you were saying earlier about how criticism has democratized and everything, is that when I was doing my PhD, I had a very similar experiences of going to parties and things and talking to people, and people saying, "Why are you doing that? What possible utility does this have?" And they were very exercised because I was getting money from the British Academy in order to do it. I was being paid to do it, and so. And yet it was a great training in really pretending to care about something that ultimately isn't of any sort of, and that as a critic, I write my 1-star reviews and my 5-star reviews, and those are the two types of reviews you have to convince people you utterly care about it. But when for me in the ultimate scheme of things, I kind of don't mind if your 5-star and my 1-star swap places. I'd love to love everything. I'd absolutely love to do that, but it just doesn't happen, and I have to be sort of honest with that. And the hardest reviews to write are actually the 3 and the 4 stars.
They are. I mean, to be honest, that's another great crisis. Is you realize if you write a review, it's like a 3-star review of a decent film that's come out, like maybe that's a foreign movie, a subtitle movie, you write it and you think, Jesus, who is going to read this review? Especially if it's not even particularly in depth. It's like sort of 300 or 400 words. You think, who is going to read this film? Who's going to read this review? Who is going to watch this movie as a result of watching this? You have to think there must be something here. And you have to force yourself. I need to isolate that glint of the diamond in the rock somewhere, even if that doesn't necessarily mean it's a brilliant film, but it's something of interest here to you. And that's where I think having a background that isn't in film journalism, a lot of people come into film journalism having done nothing else in their lives. I mean, I've done quite a lot else in a way. As I say, I wrote, I suppose in my humble way, when I was in my 20s, academic work, and then I was a general journalist. And I think that was very good for me, actually, in a way, that I wasn't literally. I didn't start out at 21 and wrote for Sight and Sound from that day to this. That would have been, I think, innovating. I think as a writer. What
about? I mean, innovating as a writer. What about this? This is something I have when I'm writing reviews, especially in a sort of a festival situation where I'm writing maybe 2 or 3 reviews a day. Is there a point where you think I'm sort of almost, I find myself slotting into a template, and I'm doing paragraph 1, synopsis, music, let's mention the cinematography.
Yeah, kind of, particularly in that so much is expected of you as a critic now. So much and when I say so much, I don't mean so much in terms of quality, I mean quantity. It used to be when a critic went to a festival, I mean, it was a very, very laid back affair. I mean, when I used to start going to Cannes or Venice, I would just be ambling about, going to see movies, and all that would be expected of you were like roundups. And they were brilliant. Writing a roundup, oh my God, I have such a nostalgic wave of joy comes over me.
I had an ice cream.
good old days of writing roundups, now there's no nonsense about roundups. If you see a movie, you've got to run out and write, if necessary, on your phone, a solid sort of 400-word review right away, and file it again from your phone. And as I say, when I realized that I could do that, I could write on my phone, part of me was thrilled. I thought, my God, I'm like Terminator 2. I've evolved into this cyborg figure with my iPhone welded to my hand. I don't have to go back to my flat or my hotel room and open up my computer and write. I can do it now. I could sit down at a cafe or even on a stairwell in the theater and write it now. And I was kind of proud of myself in a way for my battle-hardened professionalism. Now I think, oh my God, there's no way back now. Now everybody expects that, and there's no way back. But yeah, again, you have to be on your guard against it, and you have to realize that you have to somehow keep in mind the public that you're writing for, or that you want to write for. It isn't just the sort of 7 or 8 journalists that will read it and will have also seen the same film as you. You have to kind of pitch it to the public at home, but in a way you have to balance it with your expertise, a sense of being immersed in the immersion that you have. Paradoxically, that's part of why the laity, if I can use that term, are supposedly interested in what you're saying.
I think also I find writing is very much a form of thinking. So it's usually when I'm writing the review that I actually realize, it's not like I have a view of the film and I write down my view. I write the review so that I have a view of the film.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I usually know, 99.9% of the time, I know what I think and I know how much I like a film. People think, do you not know until you write it how many stars, for example, you're going to give it, something like that. I always know how much I like it, but the process of writing, I absolutely agree. The process of writing is when you start realizing, oh yeah, there was that thing, and there was that thing, and there was that connection. And I don't think I would have. I have to put my fingers on the keyboard before that process happens. Yeah, totally.
I had a situation, a few years ago when The King was shown at Venice, that I wrote a review immediately upon seeing it. And then I got commissioned to do another couple of pieces on it. So I ended up writing for it like 3 or 4 times. And I think my initial review was a sort of 3-star. Yeah, it's okay, But by the time I'd finished writing about it, I'd gone into such depth that I was thinking, this is a really good film. This is really well done.
Well, did you see The Duke?
No, The King, Timothy Chalamet version of Henry V.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought you said did you? Yeah, I know the film you mean. Yeah.
Oh no, The Duke I didn't like at all. The Duke, I haven't written anything other than my first. I found it a very Brexity movie. Yeah, I mean,
it is a little bit. I mean, it's true. I think it is. It's also. I think it's very Ealing, actually. That film. That's. I think why I liked it. I think it had that kind of neo-Ealing film. And I had this image of what would it be like if it was being made in the 60s. I think they would have got Stanley Holloway to play Jim Broadbent's role. And that, weirdly, I think that's sort of why I liked it.
Isn't that maybe a horrifying thought, though, that Ealing is essentially a form of Brexit? That if you moved the years along, the passport to Pimlico would be.
Passport to Pimlico is a little bit, yes. I mean, it is a little bit like that. But as I say, I prefer to think of Ealing in its higher mode of kind hearts, really, than films. Not that I don't love them in a way, but I think it's the fact that he's talking about free TV licenses or not of dismantling his TV so he doesn't have to get the BBC. As I say, we're all all of us liberals are on a hair trigger for that sort of thing, thinking he must be, and there is something Brexity about it, but there's always been something Brexity about the British and their sort of bloody mindedness. I mean, there was
51%. Yeah, absolutely.
There was something. I mean, I've said this before. There was something Brexity about rejecting Winston Churchill in 1945. I think there was something Brexity about that kind of cussedness and said, no, fuck you. I don't like you anymore. Because I want to wipe the smile off your face. I think it's partly that as well.
Yeah, stick that in your cigar and smoke it.
Yeah. I think that's what it is as well. I mean, that's partly what it's about. But yes, I don't know quite how we've got onto the Duke. But yes, there is. I actually said this in my piece. There is something Brexity about it, undoubtedly. But it's a kind of instant Brexit in that the Brexit that we now know has been controlled and directed by precisely those elitist forces that the Brexit movement affects to be opposed to. That, at any rate, Kempton Bunton's Brexitiness was at least his own invention. At least it was a genuine kind of dissent.
Yeah, it's kind of Kaiser Soze, the whole, down with the elites, said the elites.
Well, it is sort of a down with the elites. You could get it, and you could get away with stealing. I think you could get away with more in those days. And it's sort of typified by the fact that you could actually walk into the National Gallery and steal a painting, and also legally get away with it as well.
What about when this is something that I think you sort of bring up as well in the book of when you're looking back on things, are there any times where your judgment has you look at it and you think, no, I totally got the wrong end of the stick there?
Oh yeah, many times. I would say a number of times. I would say definitely I definitely got it wrong, and this is a sort of silly film in a way to invoke, but I think it's interesting, is The Devil Wears Prada. When I saw The Devil Wears Prada at first, I was very sneery and sort of, what a load of rubbish. Actually, The Devil Wears Prada is a really good film. It is a really well-made, well-acted, good-natured, watchable, excellent movie. I find myself straining for words like popcorn movie or entertaining movie, but that's the kind of condescension in a way. It's a very good film. And I think I was too toffee-nosed to really appreciate that. The other film that I'm sorry to say, I think I played a rather unfortunate role in its denigration. It was Jane Campion's In the Cut, which I kind of put a downer on that film at the time. And I'm ashamed of myself for doing that, because I'm still not sure that it's a masterpiece, but it was a good film with some staggering things in it, some brilliant things in it. Mainly, I think, Meg Ryan's orgasm scene. Looking back on that, I thought, what amazing, thrilling audacity for Meg Ryan to grab hold of what people know about her, which is her famous fake orgasm scene, and to do a real one. I mean, that's brilliant. It's audacious. It's thrilling. It's to take that and shove it in your face. Now, I'm doing it for real. You know I'm faking it, but I'm supposedly doing it for real. Of course you know about my famous fake one from When Harry Met Sally. Now I'm doing it for real. And what have you got to say about that? And what I should have said about that was, my God, Meg Ryan, brilliant. Fucking brilliant. Good on you. This is amazing. What a fascinating kind of situationist event you have made out of cinema. Instead, I'm sorry to say it, I was at the notorious critic screening where I think there were two people in the audience, me and Michael Parkinson. Now, I walked out of the film. I didn't know what to say. I caught Michael Parkinson's eye and I said, well, I'm not sure about that, or something like that. Some pathetic, wanky thing for me to say. And he kind of nodded to me and in his sort of gruff way, went, no, I'm not sure about it either. And I've got a horrible feeling that I confirmed him in his grumpiness. And of course, he went on to do one of his most catastrophic, I started by talking about his wonderful interview with Alec Guinness. Then, of course, he went on to do a catastrophic one with Meg Ryan, a horrible interview.
Yes, I remember that. It was so uncomfortable, such
horrible interview. And I say that I like Michael Parkinson. I've met him a number of times. I used to do his Radio 2 show when he did that, and I like him. And I think he's been a force for good, but that was a terrible moment. And I'm sorry to say, I think I may have played my own role in that, in the denigration of that film, because it was a brilliant, bold, kind of lightning raid on public sensibilities, that film. And I'm ashamed of myself that I didn't respond with any form of generosity or open-mindedness to it. And I'm afraid I didn't. I just sort of shrugged. Didn't like it.
It was also sort of coming, in the wake of a load of sort of glossy sort of sex thrillers, like, Basic Instinct, and there was a whole series of Body of Evidence with Madonna, and it came up, and it was literally dirtier. It was literally more visceral than any of those. So yeah,
I was going to think, the other thing is I think I just got off reading the novel, which I think sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing, because I like the novel, and sometimes when you sit down to a film immediately after having read the novel, you've already invested in it in a different way, and you sometimes can't sometimes can't recalibrate.
I have the same, absolutely, it's the same thing. I've got to revisit Silence by Martin Scorsese, because I actually bought the novel and read it during the day and then went to see the film at night. And it was just the wrong way of doing it, because it was essentially like watching the film twice, once straight after the other. I needed at least some space between those two things for me to properly appreciate it. I just thought, oh God, I'm sitting in the novel again. I've already just spent 4 hours reading it.
Yeah, you can't really. Yeah, you've got to be very careful. I mean, people always say that. Well, have you read the novel or not? If you haven't read the novel, then you're not qualified to talk about the movie. And I always think, well, that's not how it's going to be presented to the public. The public are going to be allowed to buy tickets and walk into the cinema without showing the QR code proving they've read the book. I think it's a tricky one, because I think what happens is it can not merely muddle you, but cause you to invest in the existence of its intellectual property in the wrong way. You tend to think, well, if I like the book, then I can't like the film, because I've already committed to liking the book in my head. So in a way, I have to be very guarded, or even kind of even antipathetic to restate, to reinforce my fanhood for the book.
What about flipping that earlier question? Because it's always asked, what did you get wrong that you didn't see the classic or the great film and you gave it a bad mark? What about films that you sort of thought were absolutely amazing, and then a couple of years down the line, you watched again and thought, oh dear, did I really I must have had a good lunch that day, or I must have, been in a good mood?
That's a good question. There aren't many films like that. I can't really think of a film where I've totally got it wrong like that I've really loved a film. I thought, actually, no, that's rubbish. I've seen a couple of films where I've given 5 stars to, and I think, you know what, it's a good movie, but I don't know about 5 stars. Maybe about Nicholas. I mean, I'm an old fan of Nicholas Winding Refn, the Dark Master himself.
Right.
And I'm glad that I took against the consensus against his film Only God Forgives, which is a kind of gross out, freak out film, sort of inspired a bit by Taxi Driver. And I'm glad I gave it a good review. I'm not sure, I think my review would have been a bit more nuanced now, but I'm glad this isn't really an answer to your question, isn't it? Because I'm sort of saying,
but in a way,
saying, no, I was right.
Fuck you. I loved it.
I'm always right. The late film critic, the late Alexander Walker, always got angry when anybody asked him this question. He always, when anybody asked him, do you think you've ever changed your mind about, have you ever got this wrong? He always heard that question. And what he heard in his head is, have you ever been defeated in an argument with another journalist? And he would always hit the fucking ceiling. No, I've never. Oh, I have to say, even now, I'm reluctant in a way to, but I honestly don't think I have. I mean, I'm aware of people thinking I must have lost my marbles in a way. I tend to praise comedies because I think I went through a long phase where I thought of myself as the only critic that liked comedies, and all the other critics didn't like real comedies, or they would bafflingly decide that reasonably funny but not that funny art house films were hilarious.
Oh, I had that with Tony Ederman, that I went to see again with
that same film.
Oh yeah, I mean, and this is where the sort of context comes into it. I couldn't get in to see the first screening of that at Cannes, and so I went to see it the day after. So I went to see it after hearing everybody saying it's the funniest film ever made, and I watched it and thought it's a mildly amusing bit of cringe comedy.
I liked this film. I didn't like it because it was funny. I didn't think it was funny exactly. I mean, I think there are humorous elements in it, of course, but it's not. Let's be real. It's not funny. Whenever a critic says to me, it's really funny, I always say, really? Like The Simpsons? Funny like that? And they almost always go, No, not actually funny like The Simpsons. No. Or I was thinking, funny asshole, funny like Arrested Development, funny like any episode of Arrested Development. And this isn't necessarily to slag off the film, because it doesn't have to be funny. Films don't have to be funny. You don't have to sell me a film. You don't have to sell me Tony Erdmann on the basis that it's funny. You can sell me funny that it's intriguing or bizarre or ingenious, all these other things. You don't have to say that it's laugh out loud funny. I mean, there are things that I think I often put on the YouTube clip of the desk pop from The Other Guys, of Will Ferrell being tricked as a culprit into firing his weapon at the ceiling, because that's a traditional thing that police officers do in the station house. I think it's absolutely brilliant. It's one of the great gunshot scenes in American cinema, because the way it's brilliant, it's surreal, because it forces you to look at what a transgressive event firing a gun actually is in the real world. In the movie, people fire guns all the time, and it's always as normal as lighting a cigarette. In the real world, of course, firing a gun is the most transgressive and horrifying thing that can ever happen. Police officers can go through 40 years careers without ever having done it. The brilliance about The Other Guys, of the surrealist brilliance of Will Ferrell sitting there and going, bang, is that it's one of the very few times in American cinema where the script acknowledges what a horrifying event it is to hear a gunshot, especially indoors. And so basically, because of that, I gave The Other Guys 5 stars, basically. I was so thrilled. And I still am. I kind of don't regret it, although I don't know whether it's a 5-star movie, because the rest of it probably doesn't quite live up to that. But it's a very funny film. And Mark Wahlberg is sort of amazing. I'm fascinated by Mark Wahlberg, because he's always the same. He's one of the most unactory. He's brilliant. He's a brilliant performer, but I never get he never acts. He never puts anything on. He just does that. But he can play comedy and absolutely dead straight. He's unique in a way, because you can see him in a comedy and he will play comedy and be really good, perfectly good. He was excellent in The Other Guys. Or he will be in a straight film, or it would be something like it in Uncharted, where he kind of does his Mark Wahlberg thing. And
in The Departed, he was very good as well.
He was, yes, that's true.
But that's kind of a comedy role. He's just turns up and swears at everybody. I love The Other Guys. I think the whisper fight in the funeral.
Yeah, that's just so funny. So funny. Brilliant. Yes, everybody gathering round and nobody else noticing. It's absolutely so good. But you see, that's what I mean. It is really funny. It's actually funny, as opposed to humorous or comic or like that. Sort of, but it's actually funny in that it will actually get a laugh at the time.
I think comedy and horror both have a similar thing, though, where because it's such a visceral and emotional experience, you physically burst out laughing and you hurt from laughing and all that sort of stuff. And it's also something that you could just chop off at the knees by saying, I didn't laugh once. And it's so vulnerable and fragile, comedy. And the same with horror, you could just say, well, I didn't find it scary. And that's it. The raison d'etre is dead,
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things. Sometimes horror, I sometimes not sure how to gauge my reaction to other people's praise of a horror film, particularly real horror fans. Sometimes horror fans will, something like Fright Fest, something like that, a film that's gone down really well. People coming out of the screening aren't pale and in a state of shock. They're not saying, Christ, I was horrified by that film. They say, they're almost as if they've seen a comedy. They've seen a great comedy. And it's sort of the same response. And it's weird, because very often with horror, actually, it's very rare to be horrified exactly. I mean, I have been horrified quite rarely by cinema. I have been horrified, but not in a way by horror films. I've been horrified by something like Threads about a nuclear war.
Oh, God. There's a film that made me.
See, there is a film. It's not a horror film, exactly as you understand it, but it is genuinely horrifying. Whereas the number of times I've been genuinely horrified by a film, even with, it's closer to say you're terrified than horrified in a way, but yeah, I mean, it's, something like, so great. I've been sort of scared or unnerved by films. It's closer to say you were just it's tilted you 1 millimeter. In a way, that's all you can expect from a film. If it genuinely has an effect on you, it genuinely has I don't need it to freak me out. I don't need it to blow my head off. but I certainly need it to have an effect on me.
I think I watched that the recent remake of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre is one of the original is one of the films that I've, terrified me when I watched it, and I still get terrified watching it. But the remake, it reminds me of that thing you just said about Fright Fest, is it feels like an action movie where they just dress up in horror stuff in order to, there's a number of kills, and there's set pieces, but it doesn't have anything like the effect the original had on me.
And I think it's almost that they don't expect it to or want it to, and that there's quite a substantial fan base that doesn't necessarily need that. They don't want to be surprised. It's like the Scream franchise. It's a sort of nod and a wink, and we all know why we like it. I think sometimes I really want something else from it. I mean, I got it. I would say I got it from Get Out, Jordan Peele's Get Out, in the way that I would call it perhaps more of a scary movie than a horror film. I don't know if there's any gradations there, but I genuinely was unnerved by it. And I think it's a movie that genuinely wanted to upset you in a way that some horror movies, even quite extreme horror movies, don't want to upset the apple cart that much.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Listen, Peter, I want to have a recommended book. So obviously your book is recommended. We're recommending it. But what about a film book that you would recommend that you've read?
Oh my God. If I'd have known that you were going to ask this, I would have prepared myself much more carefully. I'm going to look at my...
Peter is now perusing his bookshelf.
I want to talk about... a film I loved, a book I loved, which was Matthew Sweet's Shepperton Babylon, about the early British cinema industry, a book which came out before, I think it's fair to say, before the Talking Pictures TV channel in a way made that genre, kind of revived that genre, and made us think that there was an ocean of films out there that we'd sort of forgotten about. And I think that's an absolutely terrific book. I still love Jonathan Rosenbaum's Movie Wars, about what constitutes movie history. I think he's a brilliant. Let me see if I can find the not. Hang on, sorry, I'm running away to find these books. Movie Wars by Jonathan Rosenbaum, absolutely brilliant. And the other one is If You Can Bear It. I'm gonna get.
Go for it.
Well, wouldn't you just know it? The book that I wanted to get out of the shelves. I can't find now. That's just typical of me. But a brilliant book about early Hollywood. I know everybody talks about this book, but I would talk about it as Neil Gabler's An Empire of Their Own, How the Jews Invented Hollywood.
Right.
It is an amazing book because it talks about the kind of year zero of Hollywood. It's as gripping as a thriller. And it also brings you back to these words that you use all the time: 20th Century Fox, Warner Brothers, Paramount, all these words that have just, or Disney, all these words at Columbia, all these words that, you forget. It's like walking down the street and seeing Specsavers, Greggs, Marks and Spencer. These are the words that we've kind of grown up with. And yet they were real people. Amazing, MGM. Gosh, what did that? Louis B. Mayer, Sam Goldwyn, Harry Cohn. All these amazing figures, these incredible figures who invented something out of nothing. And because nobody realized how big of a deal it was going to be, they were allowed to get away with it and had it their own way for such a long time.
It's like those names are part of the landscape. I mean, literally, when you see the Warner Brothers, it's sort of painted on the big water tank. Yeah,
and it's almost a kind of it's a gobsmack to realize, do you know there were actually Warner Brothers. They were actually brothers.
There was more than one.
There was more than one. They were like real people that owned the studio. Do you know that? And they kind of invented a particular type of film, and that was our idea. Amazing, yeah, amazing.
You mentioned right at the towards the beginning of the conversation a woman who wrote for City Lights.
Judith Williamson. Now that's another. I loved her book. It's been reprinted, but I think not as good as the original first edition. It's called Decoding Advertisements by Judith Williamson. I recently have bought that book. It's been republished. It's not a bad edition, but the plates, that is to say, the reproductions of the advertisements themselves, isn't as good as I remembered it. But it is a brilliant book, and it's the first time I was ever aware of something that was called media studies. Was this book where basically Judith Williamson laid out a series of ads, the kind of ads that you'd see in the Sunday Times magazine in the sort of 1970s, ads for cars or ads for cigarettes or something like that, and literally deconstructed them in the most user-friendly way to show this is how this advertisement is trying to mess with your head. And it is absolutely brilliant. It's a brilliant book. She's absolutely brilliant.
Well, were there any? Well, obviously there were critics that you read, prior to yourself becoming a critic, that sort of influenced you, or that had you kind of thought, well, I not necessarily I want to do that style or anything, but I want to have that effect on people. I want to have the effect that they had on me.
Well, I mean, they are the same old names that I remember when I was growing up. Julie Burchill, who is an incredibly discredited figure nowadays, right or wrongly, but back in the day, in the 70s and 80s, Julie Burchill was where it was happening, and she's still. I mean, we could reread something by Julie Burchill and realize there's somebody who wanted to shake things up, who wanted to insult you and wind you up, and realize and make you think you're not here just to be soothed, you're here to be freaked out and sort of irritated and upset. Clive James, obviously, everybody says the same thing. The Clive James, the TV columns from the Observer, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And one of the great, I think, underrated classics of English literature is his sort of semi-fictionalized autobiography, Unreliable Memoirs, which is a masterpiece. It's an absolute masterpiece. It's absolutely superb.
Yeah.
And the writer who I later on, I think, hero worshipped and loved as I don't think I've ever loved any writer is Christopher Hitchens, who I met and knew a little bit back in the day. I knew him a little bit. I knew him and his wife a little bit. Again, there's a writer who is magnificent in their absolute commitment. And partly it's the sheer output, it's extraordinary volume of stuff that they were writing. But also, I think he's a writer who, perhaps uniquely among writers, was never content just to be in the stands looking on. It was as if he was taking part in almost everything he wrote. He was meeting, confronting these people, as it were, politicians or writers, or these great A-list figures, and confronting them on equal terms. And I loved Hitchens. I loved him as a writer and a polemicist. I mean, he's inspiring. You read something by Hitchens and you want to be like him. I mean, there's a whole generation of us who wanted to be like Hitchens, and we never could. But we certainly and more productively wanted to raise our game, raise it to 200%, 300% over and over again. I would say Hitchens, Christopher Hitchens, and his book. Well, almost any of his collection journalism is worth reading. And his book about the Anglo-American special relationship of 30 years ago. I forget what it's called. Where is it? Sorry, I just ran away to another part of my route to look at it. It's called Blood, Class and Nostalgia.
All right.
And it is really neglected, that book now. It's 30 years old, that book, but it's one of his most brilliant books. And if you're interested in the special relationship and whatever that means, that's an absolute must.
I'm halfway through Martin Amos's Inside Story, which has Hitchens on the cover as not a fan.
Yeah. I went through with the thing about Martin Amos. I went through what we all went through with Martin Amos, or at least all men went through with Martin Amos. Women are, for understandable reasons, kind of alienated, I think, from Martin Amos, and I it's only now that I've understood why. I love Martin Amos. I mean, I read Money when it came out, his kind of great magnum opus. I thought it was great, and I watched in a way like Woody Allen. He seemed to go off the boil almost at the same time, and we all went off the boil as well. We all sort of stopped loving Martin Amos, and in a way he was a part of an era when literature and literary fiction was more of a big deal in Britain than it is now. You know, a new novel by Martin Amis, or a review of a novel by Martin Amis, or something that he'd written was more of a big deal. Inside Story, it baffled me. I was baffled and exasperated by it, because it didn't seem to be, he wasn't being honest. He wasn't saying exactly what had happened in his life. He's still, I think, rather culpably obsessed with this woman that broke his heart, if that's what happened. But I think he kind of owes it to himself and owes it to his readers to say exactly what was going on there, instead of making up this nonsense about what supposedly, I don't know, was she a sex worker really? You know, or is that just another one of his bizarre retaliatory fictions that he put into all his books about this woman that apparently broke his heart? I'd rather read the fictional version, if that's what it's going to have to take. But this pseudo autofiction, which he hasn't really mastered the art of autofiction, or he looks like he's doing, well, this is what all the kids are doing these days. I'll have to do some autofictional made up stuff along with it. And his sort of late flowering obsession with Christopher Hitchens, which again, at the time, we really didn't know about it. I only knew about Christopher Hitchens much later, and I wasn't aware of his close friendship with Amis at all. So anyway, there we are. That's what I think about Inside Story. There's some interesting things in it, but I think I prefer his earlier memoir called Experience, which was clear, better rooted in things. But as I say, I mean, I was reading a very interesting thing by Dorian Lynskey the other day, saying that he's gone to being underrated now. You read it, wow, you know what? Martin Amis is still a brilliant writer sometimes. He really is. I'm intrigued to see what Jonathan Glazer is going to do with The Zone of Interest.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, Peter, you have to go, and you've been very kind with your time. So thanks so much for joining us.
Okay, well, thank you so much, John. Thank you very much indeed. If anybody feels like buying my book, that's going to be a real plus for me. Thank you.
So that was my conversation with Peter Bradshaw. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did. I think we had a really good chat, and we certainly went through a lot of subjects, and a lot of different films came up. There are some sort of films that keep coming up, maybe like almost like keystone films. Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Star Wars seem to be the two films that are most frequently mentioned in the podcast. If you have any suggestions for possible guests, or you have any feedback that you want to give me, you can the DMs are open on Twitter, or you can email me. My email address is available on my Twitter profile as well. It's basically drjohnty with a H @gmail.com. Next week I will be talking to Jonathan Rigby, the author of Eurogothic, amongst others. But all that remains to do is thank Elliot Atkins for the music, providing the brilliant John Carpenter / Sergio Leone music for the podcast, Ali Harwood for the art, and thanks, of course, to you for listening.